I think we've seen enough from Department of Player Safety that a new acronym is needed. We'll talk about some of the interesting things that have happened with the DPOS, as well as how a few Western Conference teams will replace key players lost to injury, and they're bringing the party to the Party City. The NHL Draft in Vegas, the final in-person NHL Draft. We'll talk all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On NHL. We are your team every day.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we welcome you into another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team each and every day. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, we wonder aloud what exactly George Parros is in charge of after several incidents over the entirety of the season and the last couple of seasons and every year since he's been installed as the head of the Department of Player Safety. We'll talk about all that, as well as key injuries for the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild, and the NHL Draft taking its talents to Las Vegas. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and one half of the dynamic duo that is the Western Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Nick Morgan, co-host of Locked On Predators, is the other half of your Tuesday show. And Nick, let's just start with, Department of Player Safety has been on one. And I say has been on one because it's kind of like they took a vacation and have just been answering emails remotely, trying to make it seem as though they're at work. But definitely not, because we've had incidents that just have continued to be wildly different in scope of suspension or, in some cases, a warning. A warning for a player who has certainly had many run-ins with the Department of Player Safety. And so I guess I'll open it up by just simply asking, what exactly does George Parros What do you say you do here?
It's like the scene from Bruce Almighty where Bruce realizes that he's has way too many prayers to answer throughout the day. So he sets up like that auto prayer request, and it's just everything devolves into chaos. It feels like George Parros has set up like a auto punishment sort of thing. And it's just anybody who has a player of safety meeting or discussion is just like a random roulette wheel that, comes down. Like we're going to have I don't know, like Nikita Kucherov wear the wrong socks or something like that and get like a 14-game Chris Simon length suspension at this point. It's just so wild. And I think you and I were talking about this, but if anybody hasn't seen the Alan Walsh Twitter thread, Alan Walsh represents David Perron, who, don't worry, we'll talk about that, just posted a Twitter thread of a bunch of different hits, plays, like stick plays, and it's just like the length of their suspension. And you're going through, and however you feel about Alan Walsh, you're going through his thread and going, okay, no, let him cook. He's on something here.
Yeah, I forgot about a bunch of these. Like it goes back to all the way back to a play between Austin Matthews and Rasmus Dahlin. I forgot completely about the Jamie Benn play against the Vegas Golden Knights. in which he just he tries to take off the head of a player on the Golden Knights. He gets 2 games. I mean, just looking at every bit of this thread, Skinner with a shot to, I think, Jake Gensel that gets 3 games. And he's absolutely right. Is you look at all of these plays and they are far more egregious. What are we doing here? And this one I think is because it hits a little more close to home for me. You have Evander Kane smashing Jonas Brodin face first into the boards, no penalty. And then you hear after the game that Department of Player Safety is looking at the play. They're reviewing it.
Yeah.
And then the outcome that they come to is, hey, Jonas Brodin put himself in a really bad situation, really bad position on that play, and that we are going to give Evander Kane a warning to, hey, the next time somebody puts themselves in a bad situation, maybe don't go full speed at them. Maybe just ease up a little bit. And so it's like, what's the plan? What is being protected here?
Here's the problem, Seth. And there's a couple of things. Let's talk about the Kyle Connor play. And who was the duck that did the knee-to-knee hit?
Dylan Strome, wasn't it?
Dylan Strome, yeah, that's right. Where he got ejected for the play, but not suspended. Kyle Connor's out a long time. We're going to talk about that in the next block. But the player of safety said something like, well, it was reckless. The skate is out, but we don't think he was targeting him or anything like that. So we're just going to give him the major nothing after that. Let's flash to the Dylan Larkin play where the big thing, and I love Locked On Sens, but their response to this was insufferable. No offense, guys. The thing with Matthew Joseph is everybody was saying, oh, well, he was probably just going to cross-check him in the back or try to clear in front of the net, and then things slipped up and he wound up hitting Larkin in the head. But the intent wasn't there, and so nothing for Matthew Joseph. And then you see the Nick Cousins and Evander Kane play, and it's, well, it was a tough play, and he hit him straight from behind. They hit him hard in the numbers. It wound up stunning them on the glass, but it was just a hockey play, and they were both going for the puck and that kind of thing. The problem is we are breaking down intent. We are going intent, and we are putting everything under the microscope. When it comes to, and love you, Seth, but we went through the same thing with Karl Kaprizov a couple of weeks ago for that hit on Alexander Carey. It was I saw a lot of Wild fans. It's well, if you pause the frame right here, you can see his eyes or this. The minute you start doing that is the minute you're going to start allowing a lot of these to slip by. And when you allow some of these to slip by, then you're going to have those gong show moments that you had in Detroit, that you had with Eric Gabranson in Columbus. You have to start penalizing intent. If we're in a bar fight, Seth, and we're just drunkenly trading verbal jabs at each other, and you wind up punching me, and just to get me to shut up, and I stumble backwards and fall down a flight of stairs and die. What happens? You go to jail for manslaughter. And it's nobody, their police aren't going to go and be like, oh, well, the punch wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad punch. He just happened to stumble backwards, and it was just kind of a rough sequence of events, and it's tragic, but there wasn't really intent there. It's no. It's your action, an illegal action, caused something that led to something bad. And so when you look at what Matthew Joseph did, it was an illegal hockey play, a cross-check, that led to Dylan Larkin getting knocked out. That needs to be penalized.
Yeah.
When you look at The Dylan Strome play on Kyle Connor, they themselves, player safety, called it a reckless play. And no, I don't think Ryan Strome was going out and just being like, I'm going to knee the crap out of Kyle Connor and take him out. I don't think so, but it's a reckless play that caused a player to have a severe long-term injury. That needs to be suspendable. It doesn't have to be like a 12-game kind of you're done in this league kind of suspension, but it needs to be something to be like you were reckless. It led to a player getting hurt. Like this, you need to be punished for that. I'm sorry. I know you didn't mean to, but this was a reckless play that led to a severe injury. The NHL needs to start doing that. And when they do, I guarantee that we will stop having these moments of players taking into their own cells. And I also guarantee you will have less headshots. You will have less boarding plays because players will know, okay, not do that.
Yeah, it comes down to, if you're trying to clean up the game, as they say that they are, you have to make, and I'm not saying, any one of these plays in particular, but at some point you just have to set the example. And you have to say, we're getting rid of these types of plays. And so here's a 10-game suspension. Like you just have to put it out there that if you do something similar, you're going to get a similar result. You can't just start policing the playgrounds unless somebody is the first one to get a little bit too harsh of a suspension. And then everybody's like, oh, geez, 10-game suspension for that? Yeah, I'm not going to. But it comes down to consistency, too, is you got to have you have to set the bar and you have to continually hit it to the point that then players get the message and they're like, okay, now I see what is going on here. And now we know what to look for, as opposed to, like you said, going essentially frame by frame to dictate, okay, this is suspendable, or actually now that I've gone to the tape, I see this, and this isn't a suspendable play. It just leads to us pulling our hair out, and frankly, I'm tired of it.
Yeah, and two more quick things because I know we're up against a break time, so I'll make this brief. But, for boarding, for hits from behind, for contact to the head, treat it like targeting in college football, where if we see it, automatic 5 minutes, it's an ejection. If we go, that gives us time. If we just go ahead and give you the 5, we can go to the booth, review it. And if it's not, you're in. If there's head contact, you're out. I guarantee that limits players trying to make those kinds of plays. And the last thing, I want to make it clear, not condoning what David Perron or Eric Branson did at all. That should be suspendable. But again, you're tougher on those initial hits. You're more consistent in calling that. That doesn't happen.
I love that idea. I think that's something that the NHL should look at. I think that's fantastic. Just give them the 5. If you deem that it's not severe enough to escalate it, then they got the 5. And if it is, then you say, see ya. And I think that's perfect. If you're listening, George Peros, if you're listening, which he probably is, let's be honest.
Yeah.
He's not
doing his job.
Yeah. Take it into consideration. We're trying to help you. We're trying to help you with ways to make this stop happening. So we'll go from talking about the inconsistencies in handing out player discipline to how a couple of key pieces that have been hurt over the last week, how teams are going to replace those players in the lineup as we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this. Today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. A new NHL season brings all sorts of possibilities, whether it be Alex Ovechkin and his quest for the most goals in NHL history, or the Vegas Golden Knights hoisting a second consecutive Stanley Cup. You can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether elite level players like Connor McDavid, Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, or Nathan McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. We know you are right up against the clock and always on the go, so you can set your sleeper lineup in under 60 seconds. And if you're a fan of other sports, you can play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, MLB, and college football on Sleeper too. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Welcome back to the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan. Moving now to how teams are going to replace key losses in the injury department. And Nick, we've got two big ones. Kyle Connor, obviously the knee-on-knee hit, and Jonas Brodin, injured by Evander Kane. They're going to miss some time. And from the Wild perspective, I think it's a little easier to determine kind of how the Brodin role gets filled. One of the sites here in Minnesota, Zone Coverage, they had a pretty detailed piece as to how it's a little easier to fill the void left by Jonas Brodin as opposed to Jared Spurgeon, because you got Brock Faber, you got Jared Spurgeon, and you've got some other veterans that you can have step in to fill that void. And Jared Spurgeon playing some of his best hockey of the season at this point in the year. So it seems like the Wild can kind of spread things out a little bit to cover up for his loss. It's still a huge loss, but the one that interests me the most is what the Jets are going to do to replace their leading goal scorer in Kyle Connor. He had 17 goals before the injury, and the only player for Winnipeg that was in double figures. Now, you got some other guys that are close, but it seems like Kyle Connor is going to be a massive loss for the Jets.
Well, not just one of the Jets' leading scorers, but one of the leading goal scorers in the entire NHL. He's fourth right now, or tied for fourth with 17, just two behind Nikita Kucherov for the league lead. So that's a guy who a lot of the Jets offense is running through. And, you talk about certain players have different types of roles, where, there's the playmaker, there's the setup guy who's good for, 25, 30 goals a year and a lot of assists and kind of makes that play. Kyle Connor in this league is one of the best pure just finishers. An excellent shot, an excellent sort of hockey awareness to be able to get himself to where the puck is going to be. And that's not necessarily skill sets that anybody on the Jets does as well as Kyle Connor. Mark Scheifele having a great year, plays a little bit different style of game than Kyle Connor. Cole Perfetti is kind of stepping up this year, plays a little bit style of game. Ehlers and Niederreiter kind of play that sort of finishing role, but not as good as Kyle Connor. So it's just, I think that it's the type of loss from the kind of player that Kyle Connor is he's the guy that can go in and finish plays. It's like being the guy that slam dunks the alley-oop, the guy that goes and is able to just absolutely nail that final nail in the coffin on a great play. Every play. That's what Kyle Connor brings to the Jets. And without him, you're going to have to ask a lot out of, a player like, let's say, Nikolai Ehlers, who's now going to be bumped back up, or Nino Niederreiter, who's going to have a bigger role now. It's up to them to kind of take that and be, the same kind of finisher that Kyle Connor was. Is just, can they do it at that same level as him? And do the Jets get, because let's be honest, this is going to cause a little bit of lost offensive production from the top of the Jets lineup. Can you get enough people from elsewhere in that lineup to step up? You don't need to have one guy step up and score 50 goals, But you do need somebody, you do need a handful of players to kind of go up and maybe exceeds expectations a little bit. And I think that's going to be key for the Jets. And then the defense and goaltending have to be solid, because you might need to win games a little bit in a different way now.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was going to tie that exactly back to the Minnesota Wild as well. Brodin is a massive loss because he's one of your probably best shutdown defenders and one of probably the best shutdown defenders in the division at the least. But if your goaltending just steps it up a little bit, and Philip Gustafson did to shut out the Seattle Kraken, and if Connor Hellebuck just continues to, he really has come on here recently to get himself back on track. It was a bit of a rough start to the year for him, but those goalies can be kind of that last line of defense. Pun absolutely intended on that one. They can be that last line of defense and can take some pressure off if they step their game up even slightly. And I think both goalies in this case can do that. And so it's for Winnipeg, like you said, it's going to be just it's going to be less offense for them here going forward. For the Wild, I think they just try to spread things around with Brodin out of the lineup, and it feels like both teams are going to just try to rise above this type of injury, and it'll be interesting to see if they do, because from a Wild perspective, we've seen plenty already this season. It'd be nice to just see normal hockey the rest of the way, but when do I ever get what I want?
Have fun with John Hines, I guess.
Hey, he's 5-2. 5-2 in the John Hines era.
That is very fair. Yeah.
It's been fun because I've talked about it on Locked On Wild quite a bit. I enjoy some of the in-game adjustments that he makes, as opposed to there hasn't been a ton game to game. There have been some lineup tweaks, but it seems like he's way more apt to make tweaks during games to try to pick particular matchups. So that's been fun to watch. And 5-2 in the 7 games since he took over.
Good for him. Good for that. Yeah.
We're going to talk to finish the show about what should be the most outrageous party the NHL throws this season, because we have the final destination for the final in-person NHL draft. We'll talk about that too. And so we'll discuss the Las Vegas NHL draft as we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what helps your team bring home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die in the garage alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much, much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
One final segment of the Locked On NHL podcast. Again, we are your team every day. And we're going to finish by discussing the NHL draft. Nick, they went big. Not only is the NHL draft headed to Vegas, but they're going to have it in the Sphere.
Mm-hmm.
The multi-gazillion dollar multimedia bubble, I guess, is the best way to put it.
I call it the ASMR ball. Just a giant sensory experience.
So there are a couple of angles to go at with this. Number one, the draft in Vegas, which just feels like the right decision. It feels like the right spot to have it. But also that this is going to be the last in-person draft. They are decentralizing the NHL draft after this season. And so one final party, but then I think this is one of those things where you go with the quick good news, bad news. Like you make a quick announcement. You're like, hey, such and such is happening. And people are like, oh, that's great. Love that. And then you make the quick like bad announcement and people are like, what was this? What was the second part? Like, what did you say?
It sucks that they're decentralizing the draft. Let's start with that angle first, because it was in Nashville this past year. I got to experience it for the first time, and part of the fun was just kind of seeing everybody together. Like, we have like teams going out and renting out bar space above Tootsie's. You have like media and stuff all coming together. And I know parts of that will be, still wherever the draft is held. But one of the coolest parts was like walking around like downtown after the draft and seeing like, some fresh-faced teenager wearing like a Philadelphia Flyers draft jersey and hat, taking picture with his family, like in front of like Broadway or Bridgestone Arena. It's just kind of like one of those, oh, this is like a cool thing for like the 6th round picks and the 7th round picks. Like nobody's outside of, the media is really paying attention at that point, but this is like such a cool moment that a player is able to fly in. And it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. It seems like it's going to be like an NBA where, maybe the top 30 players are invited or something like that. I think that's one of the most like kind of unique parts that I'm going to miss, is just sort of the way the NHL does it. It's so unique. It's so different from the other leagues. And it's such a special moment for some of these players who are able to come in right away, do, press conference in those little like side rooms and, kind of meet the fans for the first time. I don't know. It feels like we're losing something special at maybe the price of efficiency.
Yeah, I love the fact that, you get an opportunity for all these players to celebrate their hard work and to have an opportunity to just kind of live in that moment. And it's not like that's completely going away, but it's going to be way more of the players sitting in their living rooms with a bunch of friends and family in front of the TV, just waiting for their names to be announced. And I think we knew that this was coming at some point, because you look at what happens during COVID with the draft and having everything be virtual. It just seemed like this was going to be something that at some point the NHL was going to move to. And so it happens that they just decide, hey, we're just going to do this right now. So that's interesting. But the thing that I'm going to miss is the ability to just have somebody, walking up the streets with a microphone and having the opportunity to interview an actual GM of a team.
Yeah.
In the case of Kyle Davidson of the Chicago Blackhawks.
That was my outlet, right? That was Family Box Radio. That was my crew.
I did not until this very moment, but what a moment that was to just be interviewing fans on the street. And it turns out that you get the guy that's going to draft Connor Bedard without knowing it. And I think it was just amazing.
Ask him if the draft was rigged in front of the Blackhawks. I mean, isn't that everyone's dream to be able to go up to like the podium and ask Kyle Davidson? It's like, do you think the draft was rigged for you guys?
Oh yeah.
Like that's $1 million dream right there.
And there are plenty of people that say yes. So you might as well get an answer to the question, but
people are saying, Seth. People are saying.
Yeah, many people have been saying this.
Yeah.
Like it's not just a few. I'm hoping to go. And so it's going to be fun to have an opportunity to see how the NHL handles the city that never sleeps. And I mean, we know that they'll handle it well because they've got the Vegas Golden Knights right there. Yeah. But like you said, just some of the things that go into it, like renting out the space in Tootsie's, which I think was largely general manager Bill Guerin of the Minnesota Wild. So getting a chance to see those guys just do their toil and then go and hit the blackjack table or some of those other things. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's just a shame that we're not going to continue to do it, because I think then, you get the opportunity to have it in various cities, and that becomes like a pinnacle event for them. And so the fact that that's going away is going to be just another thing that you're kind of missing out on.
I wonder, first off, agree with Vegas. That's going to be awesome. And it's funny, we have our Locked On NHL group chat with all the other hosts. And it's funny how many people just kind of up and went, hey, Sean Woodley, our kind of manager. It's like, hey, Sean, what are the odds of us getting credentials? And they're coming from teams that are like, in the top 10 in the standings right now.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, so this draft in Vegas, can we go?
Any chance we can get some credentials for that?
Yeah. So I'm sure the NHL knew what we're doing, or knew what they were doing. It's like, okay, let's have like one more last hurrah. And from what we hear, like it'll probably still be drafts in different cities.
Yeah.
It seems like they'll still be like, they'll go like the NFL goes to different cities every year. Like maybe there's a chance, they go to, I don't know, like Toronto or Calgary or, one of these cities, have like the big first round for the fans, the players come on stage, and then, day 2, you can kind of do whatever. And it's, maybe more of just like a fan fest with a draft going on in the background. But
yeah,
it sounds like there's still going to be maybe a little bit of something for the fans. But yeah, and if you're talking about a last hurrah for all the teams, all the media together, it seems like that's what moving to Vegas was.
Yeah, and it's a great spot to do it. So we'll see how it plays out, but it's the do we have a name for it, for the Macklin Celebrini draft? Because he's the prize. He's the coveted asset. So are we calling it the celebration?
Yeah.
Does that seem too basic?
The Macklin matinee.
Oh,
I don't know. Well, this is a future show. We'll do nothing but come up with Macklin Celebrini puns for 30 minutes and throw it up on the channel.
Macklin for Macklin.
Yeah.
That I don't like that. Yeah. We're gonna have to workshop these folks, but that's gonna do it for today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube to continue the conversation, and our wide range of Locked On NHL panelists will keep you company all week long. Also, give us a follow on your favorite podcast platforms. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.